Very probably my favorite movie. I know everybody kids me about the fact that I've got 10 or 15 favorite movies, but, and by the way, this is not an endorsement of the movie for, you know, for your own personal viewing. I just, there's a movie that stars Ryan Gosling and Sir Anthony Hopkins. The movie's called Fracture. It's about a young attorney going up against a just a devious and very intelligent bad guy in Sir Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins' character shoots his wife and mortally wounds her. She's not dead, but very near death. And Ryan Gosling's character, Willie Beecham, goes up against this guy as the prosecuting attorney. And all of the evidence, for the most part, has vanished, and they really need the wife to miraculously come to. And she lies there in a coma in the hospital bed. And one of the most touching scenes in my book in that movie is where Willie is sitting in the room with her, and he's reading Dr. Seuss' poem. By the way, the poem Dr. Seuss wrote was one that he gave at a commencement ceremony many years ago, but it became a book. And when they were searching the house where this woman was shot, they came across this book. And so Willie Beecham is sitting in the room with this woman, and here is just an excerpt from the poem. It says, "And when you're in a slump, you're not in for much fun. Unslumping yourself is not easily done. You will come to a place where the streets are not marked, some windows are lighted, but mostly they're dark. A place you could sprain both your elbow and chin. Do you dare stay out?" And I'm going to get emotional. I promised myself I wouldn't do that, but this whole scene is a very emotional scene. Do you dare stay in? Do you dare stay out, or do you dare go in? How much can you lose? How much can you win? And if you go in, should you turn left or right and 3/4, or maybe not quite? Or go around back and sneak in from behind? Simple it's not, I'm afraid you will find, for a mind maker upper to make up his mind. You can get so confused that you'll start in to race down long wiggled roads at a breaknecking pace and grind on for miles across weirdish wild space. Headed, and I love this, headed, I fear, toward a most useless place. The waiting place. Waiting for a train to go, or a bus to come, or a plane to go, or mail to come, or rain to go, or the phone to ring, or snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or a no, or waiting for their hair to grow. Everyone's just waiting. And it goes on, the poem does. And if I were allowed, I would like to add a few additional ones. Waiting for bikers to ride, or a light to turn, for a driver to decide, or my brain to learn, for the doc to call, or my ache to go, to get past a wall, or for the church to grow, for my heart to heal, or to be understood, my kid to heal, or start feeling good. I, and those of you who know me, will amen this. Hate waiting. Amen. Amen. You guys have, through the years, laughed at my stories about how pathetic I am at driving and how impatient I am at drivers. And the folks that sit for 2.3 seconds after the light turns green before they hit that, and you know, it's the same, that pedal is in exactly the same place on every make and model in the United States. That it's the furthest pedal to the right. It's not that hard to find. And these accelerator challenge drivers are just mind-numbing to me. They rob anywhere from 1 to 6 seconds out of my entire day. I remember one day I was running late, and generally I'm on time or a little early, but this day I was running late, and I was thinking, I know I'm going to get that light red, and sure enough it turned red, and I thought, oh, there's 2 or 3. Did I tell you guys about this? I don't know if I did, but I said, well, there goes 2 or 3 minutes right there. And so I thought, well, I'm going to time this light, you know. So I'm sitting there with my watch, and I'm timing it. It wasn't 2 or 3 minutes. It was, I kid you not, 20 seconds. 20 seconds. But my blood pressure was up, and I was, you know, oh. So, you know, there's a lot of studies that have been done in our culture over the last few years about the increase in technology and what it's doing to us as a culture. And one of the things that sociologists are beginning to recognize is that our attention span is getting shorter, and we have absolutely no patience with anything that requires us to wait at all. We want our food right now. If the waitress or the waiter doesn't get it to us immediately, we're, you know, frustrated. And it's funny when you're sitting there at the restaurant and you're waiting to be served, and you know, you're talking, and there's this clock that's running in the background, and you know, and at first it's really quiet, that clock is, you know, and after 2 or 3 minutes it starts getting a little bit louder, and after about 5 minutes, and you know, and at some point, you know, you're starting to pat your feet and, you know, getting frustrated because we just don't, in our culture especially, we don't wait. We don't wait for anything. And another thing that sociologists are telling us in this technological age is that we're beginning to think that everything is about us. That everything kind of revolves around us, and that it should happen, and it should happen right now. And so we are becoming a culture of very angry people. Because interestingly enough, and my wife refers to my driving on occasion as road rage, which I think is an overstatement. I really believe she is overstating, because it really isn't road rage, but it is a severe case of road frustration, in that there's just a lot of waiting to be done. Mark chapter 5, verse 21. Last week we were looking at Jesus when he stilled the storm. And I made the statement that if you have a God that is big enough for you to be mad at because he doesn't do what you expect him to or want him to, then you also have a God who's big enough to have reasons for not meeting your expectations that you won't have any way of understanding. And one of the things that I think derails people's faith more than any other thing is that we get frustrated when God doesn't answer, or it doesn't appear that he's answered our prayers. We want God to be instantaneous. We want to snap our finger and have him just do what we tell him to. And if that was really the God we served, he wouldn't really be big enough to save you anyway. So, you know, I don't need a God who jumps through my hoops. That God would not be big enough to lift me out of the mess that my life is in. So, I love this story, and I want you guys to get into this picture, this event with me, starting with verse 21. And anybody in here who's ever had a sick child, anybody in here who's ever had a very, very ill child, and I've had a couple of occasions to follow my daughter Rachel in an ambulance. That was really fun. You talk about the waiting. This was twice right after she was born. We chased an ambulance to Rapid City. The first time the doctors told us, now just imagine this. The doctor told me as they were loading that tiny little baby in the ambulance that she very likely would not be alive when she got to Rapid. So we were living in Spearfish at the time, and it is 7,500 miles from Rapid to Spearfish when you're following in an ambulance and your baby is in that ambulance. And the whole way from Spearfish to Rapid, I'm bargaining with God. You know, I've got this and this, I'm glad to give you, and you know, if you'll do this, then I'll do. And the interesting thing about that is I knew even in the bargaining mode that I had absolutely nothing really to bargain with. That he didn't need anything that I had to give him. And there was an enormous frustration that comes in that realization that no matter what you say, no matter what you do, the genie is not necessarily going to pop out of this bottle and just do what I tell him to do. So there have been a couple of occasions when I've rushed my daughter Anna to the hospital when she was having asthma. One night when Kayla was having respiratory distress, and I didn't even wait for the ambulance, just threw him in the car, and we were hightailing it down the road with my blinkers on, and a cop pulls me over. And he stepped up to the window and said, why are you in such a hurry? And I said, my son's in the back seat. He is very ill. And the cop says, don't you think we should get an ambulance? And I said, seriously? You want to wait here while an ambulance comes? I'm already on the road. And he said, all right, go. But imagine your kid being just deathly ill. And that's what we've got going on here in verse 21. Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake. A large crowd had gathered around him, and while he was by the lake, and these folks that had gathered around him were gathered around him to watch the magic show. They weren't there because there was substance in what Jesus was saying for the most part. They were there anticipating seeing something really cool. They could talk about it. Starbucks next week. So verse 22, then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and he pleaded earnestly with him, my little daughter's dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. And so Jesus went with him. And a large crowd followed and pressed around him. And now watch this, the interruption, verse 25. So this guy Jairus has been waiting a long time, watching the daughter fade. And it seems like the clock's barely ticking. But the woman in this event has been 12 years with this affliction. 12 years, has spent everything she's had on doctors and has suffered not only from the affliction but from the doctors' cures. And there is just this desperation. And by the way, she would have been a social outcast. The affliction that she has would have had her ceremonially unclean. So for 12 years she has been unable to interact with anybody in her society. So just imagine that. I mean, I'm kind of an introverted guy, and I don't mind a day or two when I don't have to interact with people. But, you know, after a couple of years, that'd get old, you know. I'd want to sit down with Tom Buck and have a cup of coffee or something, you know. And so there is, you talk about waiting, You know, Jairus is waiting, and he's worried about his daughter, but this woman has been waiting for 12 years. A large crowd is pushing in. A woman, verse 25, was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had, and by the way, there was an enormous cultural taboo that if somebody who had been in contact with blood or that had an affliction like this touched anybody else, they became ceremonially unclean. And if you touched a rabbi, that was a bad deal. It was just taboo in that culture. So she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. And when she had heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd, and I looked for a good depiction of this and couldn't find it. Most of the pictures were, blonde-headed women, reaching out to grab a hold of, a very Anglo Jesus. And that's not what was going on there. But here is this woman in desperation. She hears about Jesus. She comes up behind him in the crowd, and she reaches out and touches his cloak because she thought, what? If I can just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped. She felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized the power had gone out of him, and he turned around in the crowd and said, what? Who touched me? And his disciples, verse 31, you see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around. Now, I love this. Now, the one person that we're not seeing right now is who? Jairus. What do you think Jairus is doing right about now? He's waiting. His daughter is dying, and Jesus has stopped the procession, and he's looking around for somebody who touched it. And Jairus is thinking, let's go. Okay. Now, at once, let's see, verse 31, 32. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, the hem of my garment has made you whole. Right? No. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. And all of this while, all the time that it took the woman to tell her story, and I don't know how long that was, but to Jairus, it would have been a long time. I suspect, when you're telling your story, when you've overcome a great ordeal and you have an opportunity to tell that story, you don't miss many of the details. So I'm just guessing that this woman just went on and on and on telling the story. Maybe she didn't, but I do suspect that Jairus is patting his feet. We pat our feet a lot, don't we? So while Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, don't be afraid, just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brothers of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. And he went in and he said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but just asleep. And they laughed at him. And after he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and he said to her, Talitha cum, which I was reading some stuff about what Jesus said here, and it doesn't translate very well. it says, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. But it was not a little girl be resurrected. It was the exact thing that a mother would say if she was waking her daughter up for a morning of playing in the park. She would say, "Honey, it's time to get up." So Jesus just goes in and says to this little girl, "Honey, it's time to get up." And she gets up. Whew. Immediately the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12. At this they were completely astonished. And he gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this. And told them to give her something to eat. I love this. I love it for so many reasons, but I love the fact that there is the strict order not to tell anyone. Can you imagine being this dad whose daughter was laying there cold and dead, and this teacher just comes in and says, "Honey, it's time to get up," and the kid just gets up. Can you imagine being at Starbucks the next day and not saying, "You know what, I got to tell you guys something"? Oh, I missed a slide. See it? Oh, no, we're good. Sorry about that. I thought I do that from time to time. I get to talk and forget to switch slides. But probably my favorite Old Testament scripture, and we talked about this in class this morning, is Isaiah 40. They who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will run and not be weary. They will walk. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not grow tired. And I really do believe that Isaiah is probably talking about three different ways that God works in us while we wait. The most important thing about it is this, man, that what you are waiting for is not nearly as important to God as what He does in you while you're waiting. And I don't have time today to unpack this, but I do want to say that I think there are three different ways that God works while we're waiting, or when we're in a crisis. The first one is the mounting up with wings like eagles, which is the most dramatic, and it's the one that we always pray for. And it's the one that we church folks like to talk about, because we want people who aren't church folks to think, well, if you come be a part of this group, or if you come be Christians, then God will just kind of snatch you out of the difficulties when they come. Does God on occasion snatch us out of difficulties when they come? Yeah. Certainly. And God gets the glory for that. But the truth of the matter is, and by the way, I mean, this is right out of other Old Testament passages where God says to Israel, I will just lift you up and bear you away on the wings of eagles. I saw a big old bald eagle the other day on the way to camp. That has just got to be one of the coolest ways to get around. I mean, if you really think about it, I mean, just to have that, and don't they just have that kind of regal kind of mess with me and, you'll get hurt kind of attitude? I mean, just... And the thing that is so cool is to watch the eagles and the hawks when a storm rolls in and all of the other birds are scrambling for some place to hide. And I've seen this a couple of times. One time specifically in Spearfish, watching this massive summer storm roll in, and I'd been watching these hawks hunting in this field, and this big storm rolled in, and all the other birds were looking for a place to hide, and these hawks just... the set of their wings just use the storm to just fly above it. And before you know it, you could barely even see them. They were just little dots in the sky. So yes, absolutely, I believe that on occasion God lifts us on eagle's wings. I also believe that in the long haul, the interaction of God says, I know this is going to be tough, but I'm going to provide the strength for the long run. You just lean on me. We're going to go. The ones here in Isaiah 40 who run and don't grow weary. Jesus would say as he's departing, go into all the world, preach, baptize. And I love this. And I am with you, what? Always. Even to the end of the world. So he says, I'm going to cover you. I'm going to strengthen you. I'm going to provide you with what you need to get over the wall. And then there are those moments, and there have been several of them in my life, where you just put one foot in front of the other and you feel like you've accomplished something, right? Just walk and be glad you're not weary. And I think it's in those times that God says, I'm going to do something inside of you so much more important than lifting you up with eagle's wings. So, the Christian PR machine would say, come to God and He will fix all your problems. The truth of the matter is that the New Testament says, and Jesus would say this explicitly, in the world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have what? I've overcome the world. Well, that doesn't do me a lot of good. You've overcome the world, but what about me? Well, Jesus says, well, you're going to have tribulation. What? That doesn't sell books. I don't know that I've ever seen a book. In this world, you will have tribulation. It sold all of 5 copies. Sign up here and get your free copy. We don't like that aspect, but the truth of the matter is, God is not a genie in a bottle, and He's not going to fix all of our problems. He is, however, going to accomplish amazing things in us if we come to Him in faith. And we wait. Jim, come lead us in invitations.